Wembley's been on a whole bunch of journeys and through a whole lot in the last 11 years. A digital journey I know nothing about, but Lizzie Liebenhals does, and she's going to take you on that very trip. Lizzie.
Hi guys, I move around quite a bit. I'm hoping you've been to Wembley Stadium before. If not, we'll go through that as well. So when they opened in 2007, they had 2 in-bowl screens. They had 1,500 stadium vision screens. That's the screens in the concourses, if you know what I mean by that. And the arch, obviously, which is iconic for them. But what they didn't have was any content. They didn't bank anything. They didn't have anything to put in those platforms, and they had no budget, which was quite key at the time. I arrived in 2013. They asked me to come in and work with them and on a project basis. And so they were starting to install new things. So if you've been to Wembley, there's a massive screen on the front. Very few stadiums have that. They then they had no process or education. So IT was actually putting all the infrastructure in, but all the other departments didn't actually know what was happening or how that would work. We have a lot of event owners at Wembley. They aren't a stadium like Arsenal or Chelsea or Tottenham where you just have one thing and maybe selling your concerts outside of that. Wembley has the FA, it also has the NFL, it has the Football League. So none of those event owners were actually prepared for having a budget for actually putting content together for any of those platforms. No creative agency. I'll talk about that later. That was very important for me. I needed to know what was going on outside of the business, outside of what was happening at Wembley, sort of like who was putting stuff on what screens, how did that work, how was it animated, was it interesting. We had a lot of incumbent suppliers. That's quite a big thing if any of you here are already in a supplier situation or a stadium situation. You have your suppliers in-house. Suddenly you're putting in huge amounts of technology, and maybe that supplier isn't the best one or doesn't understand how that works either. No commercial earnings. America do this really, really well. They know how to make screens, digital content work, selling for sponsorship, telling you how that works. And also for Wembley, when I got there, the screens were dead all the time until it was event day. And I was like, well, that just looks like everything's turned off. So it was about energizing, educating, getting people back into that place. What are you going to do when I think there's about 4,000 staff on any non-event day at Wembley. Like, what are they looking at on those screens? How are you working with that? No rules or regulations. I know that sounds really sad and a bit sort of like a bit dull, but it is quite important to be able to tell everybody the same thing. It's like, you can't do this, you can do that. By 2018, we had a full tech spec. That was really important for everybody. We were talking about suppliers, event owners. These are all the different ways. It was like a document. These are all the different ways you have to produce your content to get onto the different screens. So if we recap quite quickly, you've got an arch, you've got the big screens on the front, you've got 1,500 TVs, you've got 2 big screens inside the bowl and the tier 2 ribbon. So all of that is very different technology. All of that needs to be created in a very different way. You can't create one thing and then put it onto all of those different platforms. It's not going to work like that. I brought in a creative agency, ID. They were really good for me. They told me what's going on in different stadiums around the world, actually, and what's going on in terms of like, these are the different things that work really well. The screens are on 365 days of the year now. So we were able to sell sponsorship to EE, for example. So they have the tier 2 ribbon every single day. So when tours are coming in, they have their branding inside. So that was really important, that actually you didn't look dead, dull, turned off, broken on non-event days. We have a contents plan. So for Wembley, this was a really big shock for them. It's like, we already had a calendar. We know we're going to do 10 England games, the FA Cup final, Community Shield. I want you to build content for that purpose. And also we banked a lot of stuff that was generic. So we would make something that was very generic, so welcome to Wembley, congratulations, Happy Christmas. There's a big thing about that. I couldn't say Happy Christmas, so I had to say something different on that. But we banked a lot. So we had to have a budget allocation, but we kept a lot of stuff. Content's really king. If you've got a lot of digital screens differently, you have to bank your stuff. And we were very proactive. By the time we banked stuff and we were actually looking forward to 2019, 2020, we knew what was happening. It enabled us to be very clear about things like terrible tragedies about people who are dying. We were able to put things on the screens that would give momentum to the outside world. So actually you'll see at the very end, one of my proudest moments was linking all of the external screens at Wembley for the Paris tragedy. So we were up there with all the iconic buildings. We were able to do that because we had banked a lot of the other stuff. Right, so they updated whilst I was there. They now still have 2 in-bowl screens. They have 1,600 concourse screens. So I'm not sure where you're all from, but that's quite a big thing here. We zoned places. So my big thing about that when you're in a stadium or a venue is look at what your customers are doing in those screens. So I can tell you some really random facts. 45 seconds you'll look at a screen on level 1 at Wembley. You're talking to your mate, you're getting a pint, you're looking up, that's interesting. No sound, so it's a bit like being in a pub. So you're talking to mate, so that has to be very visual. On level 5 at Wembley, I'm a hardcore drinker. I couldn't give a monkey's what's going on those screens. I could put anything on there, not interested. So you have to walk the building to know what content you want to put on that's engaging for your audience. That's quite key. So we zoned that. So we zoned Club Wembley hospitality. We wanted to tell them about what other hospitality things were going on. We wanted to tell level 1, hey, look, are you having a good time, or do you want to go up and understand what's happening in the VIP area? Again, level 5 was quite brutal. They're not that interested. So actually what we did on those screens, that was unimportant. We want to give them that energy and that atmosphere, but actually they're not paying attention to those screens in the same way. Tier 2 ribbon, longest in Europe, very dull fact, I guess, but also it's one of those really weird things that actually, when you're at a concert, you're watching that. So have you been to the O2? They run their calendar around the Tier 2 ribbon. Wembley weren't doing that. Wembley weren't doing anything. They were just having these sort of like flags going around. And it was like, so we changed that. We put some different content on there, and we actually got to tell people what was happening in terms of membership and content for the rest of the year, and people were interested because you're sitting there waiting for something, particularly at concerts, not at football. Large external screen on the front. I call that Les in his ears. Everyone jokes about that. We banked a lot of content. I've talked about that, but for large external screen, they paid about 3 million for that. But again, didn't have the right content, didn't know what they were doing with it. It's a global platform. People are in front of it all the time, either being interviewed or actually you're showing people what's on there. What is something that's a very level playing field? I think I talk about that in a bit, but we were very clear that it wasn't supposed to be advertising. So if you've seen Piccadilly Circus, it's just advertising. This was the front. It's supposed to be engaging. It's supposed to be interesting. It's supposed to tell you stuff. It's supposed to tell you, I can tell you randomly, it takes you 6.5 minutes, 7.5 if you're a girl with heels, to walk from Wembley Stadium to the front. And in that time, there's a window of script opportunity. What are you going to see on event day? It's 13.5 minutes, up to 23 minutes, because you're coming in with a load of different people. So you're having to educate your event owners and space about that journey. What are you going to put on the front of that screen for 6 minutes when I'm walking to work, 7 if you're a girl, 23 minutes if you're in an event space. What is that? One of the big things about that when I was starting to work with them is people were scared about repetition, particularly in a stadium. It's like, once you've walked in, you're in. I want you to repeat that content, because otherwise you're not going to see it again. Everyone wants to have this fresh, moving content that was very interesting, that went for a longer period of time. But actually, we pulled down the script, we did it into repeat format, just because as a stadium, we knew people were watching, coming in. They're different people. I needed to cross all event owners and departments to give them some guiding principles about all of the digital platforms. I wanted to be engaging. One of the biggest things when I first started with them was they were giving me PowerPoint slides. And so I said to them, okay, you're in your lounge. Would you watch static graphics at home? Would you? And they're like, so why are you giving that to me? So a big thing, particularly when I do this presentation with other stadia, is that marketing don't get that. They're a bit, and also marketing are already in VIP, having a drink. They're not even seeing what they've given you as content either. Very big thing. I'll talk about that in a minute. So it needs to be engaging. It needs to be really, really sort of like what you want to watch. World class, particularly for Wembley. We're a world-class stadium. Everyone knows us. It's really, really important that we have the same principles. All the content's the same. So no one is ever going to say, oh, that's a terrible piece of content. I reckon Mars produced that. They're going to say Wembley had a terrible piece of content on the front of their screen. Everything had to be consistent and really, really importantly, good. I'll give you a very, very quick scenario about that. So a sponsor gave me a piece of content. It had, and this is going to sound weird, about 5 seconds blackout on the end of the VT. I was like, I want you to give it to me in entirety. They were like, no, it's too late. Sure, as what happened, the BBC filming outside, talking to the camera. Do you know how long 5 seconds is to a piece of camera? And the screen looked like it was off because they weren't doing these bits. No blatant adverts. I will tell you a story about Vauxhall. They were an England sponsor. New agency came in, saw the front of the stadium. We want to put all these adverts on there. Standing outside before an England game, looking, and it was a feature of a car driving towards the screen. I was like, how is that anything to do with England? How is that engaging? What does it tell fans? He said, it's award-winning LED side lights. I thought, how's that working? So we had to sort of put that into place. It's like, actually, this isn't about adverts. This is about welcoming people, knowing that journey, understanding those different things. America do it really well, particularly the NFL. Global recognition. It goes without saying. Okay, so I used a creative agency. People may or may not understand or appreciate that. I needed it. We didn't have it in-house. They told me a lot about different things. They came on the journey with me. They were able to turn around content a lot quicker than anyone in-house. And they were really, really brilliant, and it allowed me to progress Wembley across all of the different screens and possibilities. So I really appreciated that. They pushed us to go bigger. That was really, really important, and they delivered under pressure. If you work in an agency situation, you understand that. The client comes to you and says, I want you to deliver something in 10 minutes. You have to do that. So, and they were brilliant at that. I'm going to show you a little bit about what we did sort of graphically and content. So I'm conscious of time and your attention span. So anybody who wants to talk to me about individual types of screens, they can come back to me and I can tell you all kinds of finicky things that we did. But I wanted to talk about some other things if we're talking about the digital journey of Wembley. This was the sofa to seat experience. This happened in about year 4. So when I first got there, they were like, oh, we've got all of this screens. We haven't got any content. We worked through that. Remember, we had a contents plan. We were starting to deliver content. We're banking stuff that's generic. Remember that? And then about year 4, we were like, okay, we need to really engage with people in a different way. And that was the sofa to seat experience. So, I don't know. Who knows the Spice Girls are at Wembley? Yeah, maybe not. Okay. So what's happening right about now is that I want you to understand what's going to happen at Wembley, and I want you to, from the very beginning, you buy your ticket or excited about the Spice Girls. I want you to know that actually when you come to see the Spice Girls, you'll be able to create your own content. And actually, if I go back a bit, I'll talk about Ed Sheeran's people. So Ed Sheeran, back in 2014, did a little gig in Shepherd's Bush and said, God, I wish this was going to be at Wembley Stadium. And then when actually he was going to be at Wembley Stadium, his PR and marketing team came to Wembley and said, how do we do that? And they had a bank of content. They wanted to educate their fans. They wanted to say to them, when you go to Wembley, you know that if you take a selfie, the chances are you're going to see yourself on one of the screens. And it was about taking that process. It took 6 months. Not every production company or PR company or event owner's going to do that, but actually Ed Sheeran's people did. So let's go with that. Let's go with Spice Girls. So in about June next year, you know that you're going to be able to take a photograph of yourself as you come out of Wembley. Hi, I'm having the best time of my life. And knowing that it's going to be inside, either on one of the screens on the concourse or potentially on screen. So it's about educating, causing a story, engaging with you from very, very early on. It's also about telling you, do you know what's going to happen next? Do you know what's going to be on in 2 months? I use this great scenario of a couple who go, they watch an England game, they're in level 1, they're watching it, they've got their pints, and then all of a sudden she's like, oh my God, Ed Sheeran's playing in next year. He's upscaling. He's like, oh my God, they're VIP tickets. I can buy that. So on those screens, you're educating people. You're getting that data. You're getting them to buy up into a different space. It's a basic sofa to seat journey, and you're using those screens to do that. You're adding value to the overall experience. You're in a place where actually we're a very competitive market. Any stadium is. Whether you go to the O2, London Stadium, what is it that when you go there that's making you feel really, really important or really, really loved or really, really interested in where you're going, not just for what you're going to see on stage? So all of the digital content around Wembley is about making that experience better, irrespective of whoever you're watching. My key learnings, this is quite different for different people, for different things. Content is king. You can put as Wembley did, they put 1,500 screens into Wembley and then there wasn't anything on them. You need to think about that, and you need to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to do that. So one of the big things that the NFL do, and when they come to Wembley, it's very, very different, and it's really important, and I would say that to anyone here, is like, create content for your platforms. What works on YouTube isn't going to work on a screen around a concourse. What works on the big screen is nothing that's going to work around the tier 2 ribbon, is it? They're very different platforms. Make your content ready for those platforms. It's really important that you do that. This is quite a controversial thing, but I really believe in it. I think whatever you do in terms of digital and content, walk your stadium or walk your venue or walk your event. If you want to be the best person at engaging with your fans, be a fan. you've got to walk in to see how they're experiencing stuff. See how long, we talked about 6.5, 7 minutes to walk up Wembley Stadium, 23. I did that journey. I wanted to know what a fan wants to do. That's really important. If you're on different levels of your concourses, if you're on different levels of stadium, if you're just trying to create content, have a look at it from the opposite side. There's no point in being with all your marketing team and sponsorship, thank you, but not having experienced it. One of my biggest things, particularly at the FA, was like everybody was giving me content, particularly sponsors, and then sitting in the VIP bit with their glass of champagne. I was like, do you want to come and have a look what your fans think? Because they are not bothered about what you're putting on the screen. It doesn't make sense. We haven't got sound. It's not interesting. Would you have a look at it? They're like, oh, it's great. Actually, come and have a look and see what the opportunities you are missing. Keeping things fresh. Don't be scared to change stuff. Again, that's about you existing in your own events and understanding that. You can repeat in some ways, but actually it's interesting if you don't. I would say get an agency to help you from an outside place, but that's it. So my proudest moments, I think 10 minutes, you're welcome to ask me questions. The reason I'm telling you about my proudest moments is because they're all quite different. So Wembley Arch, best global image, unfortunately under the Paris tragedy, but actually we were up there iconically because we'd banked a lot of imagery that we were able to do that. Winning best engaging fans for the Football League, that may not or may be interesting to you, but basically what we did was we said to fans before you went to the football match, you could vote to see whether you wanted your colour of your arch. Slightly innocuous in the fact that we had to make 20, 80, 60, 40 of the different colour palettes to do that, but we did that and actually it got an amazing award for that. The E launched again for the arch. I sold loads of Club Wembley hospitality off the Tier 2 ribbon. No one ever would have thought about that because no one was even thinking that actually when you're at a concert, you're looking at certain different screens. For me, Coldplay, because they basically came in and totally engaged with all of our digital screens and were like, we're all about colour. Has anyone been to Coldplay's concerts? The colour and the bands, they were totally on board with everything digital. They were like, okay, where's the plug? We're going to put something in and we're going to make it amazing. And so they were really good, and that certainly for me still gives me goosebumps. Anyway, more than happy to take questions if you need.
I've got a couple of them for you from Slido. What's the best approach to nail your content? Trial and error?
Oh gosh, my best approach. I guess it's depending on what all your platforms are. So for me, it's about going out and seeing what your audience is doing first, and then seeing how often they're looking at your platforms, and then it's like, okay, well then I will create something in and around that. So kind of a little bit of trial and error, but I guess it's about being involved in what you're. There's no point creating something if you're not going to go and see it yourself. I 100% believe that. If you're not going to create something to see it wherever you're positioning it, why would you?
So how often do you change the content? I guess that's depending on what.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the bit where I was saying about. So for certain elements, repeat is very important for a stadium. So if we're doing the walk up on the external screens, you're repeating it all the time, and event owners are like in fear of that. Why? It looks like a script that's repeating itself. But actually, if you say, for example, if you were coming to every England game, so I think there's 6 or 8 of them for the year, I would want to give you something different every time you look at that screen. So that might be stats, facts, voice pops, things that are really interesting that get your attention because you're going. So if you go to your local pub, and every time you go to a local pub on the screens they've got the same thing, you're like, you'll totally lock out, won't you? But if you go and actually they're like, hi, so is this your birthday? Or hi, why are you here with your friends this time? And something different on the screen, you're like, that's really amazing. So it's dependent on your platforms, but certainly don't be afraid to repeat on one-offs, but regular things you need to be refreshing every time.
How long is the content creation cycle? FA Cup final, when do you start creating the content in your showcase?
Okay, so that's quite a sore point for me in terms of like I find it very hard to work with the FA who like they know FA Cup finals coming around every year, right? Community Shield is like it's in the calendar, and so for me, when you're talking about digital platforms, it's like you need to be thinking about what you're going to be putting on those screens 6 months in advance. The FA maybe don't do that. So it might be a little bit last minute, which I believe it shouldn't be. And I worked for 6 years, and can you see my grey hair from doing that? It was hard. It was hard. Having a plan of action and banking your content early is so beneficial, and it's actually cheaper. So one of the biggest things everyone talks about with the NFL, they're like, oh my God, they've got huge budgets, but. So for me, the NFL, they produced the Jaguars, if you've seen that. The Jaguars, they produced a 50,000, bear with me on that, £50,000 worth of VT. Now, they've used that for 10 years. So if you divide that on how much every time you're creating something manically, because it's the Big Cup final, actually this piece of content is timeless, amazing. It's been using for 10 years, so yeah.
What Adele was a fairly unique use of that space.
Adele?
Yeah, that in the round show last year. Does that rank in your sort of highlights for
Well, so concerts are very weird because they look at the bottom line all the time. So they're like, well, I couldn't give a monk. So Eminem, for example, we had them for 3 nights. The promoter was like, I couldn't give a monkey. Says he, how much is that? I've got to put something on the screen on the front. I was like, $3,000. They were like, no, we're not taking that off the bottom line. We were like, we can't have Eminem for 3 nights at Wembley without having. So actually, we created it. But again, Adele's the same. It's like they won't see that they're badging. What I would say is, in this instance, they're badging something. Ed Sheeran didn't. They were like, okay, we get that. We're going to tell our fans that me and you saw Ed Shepherd's Bush. We're going to tweet about that, and by the time I get to Wembley, I've got potential to see that on the external screen, the internal concourse screens, or the in-bowl screens before I watch him play. It's different. It doesn't cost anything different. It's about a PR marketing thing. But most concert promoters won't do that because it's their bottom line.
It's interesting, so it's not how you dynamically use the space differently, it's what the promoter wants to give you to...
Correct, 100%. So if they don't have anything they want to showcase to their fans, quite often Wembley used to like just switch it on to MTV, and you're like, what, you're missing the point. You could go to all your sponsors and say, these are all the screens you could be showcasing that. That's why I kind of use Ed Sheeran as a really great example.
So which of the properties, FA, NFL, EFL sponsors, Mars, Vauxhall, are viewed as having the most successful...
Yeah, Nike. Right. 100% Nike are amazing. They get digital. Anything they gave was always worked. It was engaging, interesting, great. Let's pass over the Vauxhall with the side lights on a car. Who else have you got there? NFL, the big thing that NFL do, which is really, really important, is they create content that shapes each platform. So that looks very different. So Nike do it really well. They'll give you something that actually, when you plug it into all the different screens, it works. NFL actually think, we're going to make a specific piece of content that looks great for the Tier 2 ribbon. We're going to make a piece of content that looks great for the front of the stadium. They do it so very differently. Quite a lot of event owners would give you something that would work on YouTube. So, for example, Roy Hodgson, the England manager, They gave me a 25-minute team talk piece of content to put on the concourses during an England game. Well, 1, 25 minutes anyway. 2, you can't hear anything. You've all got your ears in, haven't you? So you're not going to hear anything on a concourse. This is the same thing. So basically, for 25 minutes, you're having a pint, looking at Roy Hodgson, going. It's about doing that.
I guess the NFL, because you were saying America's
Yeah.
really good at doing it, and that was America coming to the UK, so that it's a given already. They're going to know what.
Yeah, they do amazing stuff. They do some great stuff. If you're in America, like they use all of their concourse screens to tell you if they're running out of burgers, running out of drink. They tell you where to go to the next kiosk that has those things. We're maybe a bit behind on that.
What are your measurement metrics to determine who isn't successful, and how do you measure ROI?
That's a great question. How do you measure your return on investment? I don't know whether you can on just digital screens, because I guess no one who's a fan's going to come back and say that's the best thing I've ever seen in that place. I guess maybe the good example of that maybe was the Football League, when they decided to do a piece which was against Spurs and Chelsea, and they said to fans, vote each night, and when you vote, the best person will have the colour of the arch. So that your return on investment is actually physically seeing people whether they vote. It was kind of a little bit made up to get that. As I said to you, everyone thought they were voting and they aren't just making them, but we had to do it a different way. But I guess if you're going to go into an award situation, or you actually get such investment off of doing that kind of mechanic on something, maybe yes.
That's great. Lizzie, thank you very much indeed.
No
Fantastic.
problem.
Cheers.